Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community, is brought to you by Handi Quilter, designed by a quilter for quilters, and Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years. Hi, and welcome to Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community. I'm Mary Kate Karr-Petras, and I'm here today with quilt artist Pennell. Hi, Peg. Peg is here to show us free motion quilting. Peg, as you know, from your experience as a teacher and a lecturer, a lot of people are still really mystified by free motion quilting.
Yes, they are.
You brought a couple of your own samples here. Why don't you tell us about
I did.
this?
I brought two samples here that I thought would kind of demonstrate how different it looks when you use different quilting stitches. These are the same exact pattern done in two different colorways, but I've used a different quilting pattern. I've used kind of a stone pattern in this one, the little circles, and in this one I've put in some feathers, and so it just kind of demonstrates how different a quilt can look. So the quilting really does make the quilt in the end. So I can move those out of the way so we can talk a little bit about
how you achieve those results.
How I get there.
Yeah.
So I don't do much marking. I tend to do most of my quilting without marking. So I'm going to put, just for the feather, anytime I would make a feather, I would mark a very minimal amount. So I would use, and chalk markers are my favorite because I don't have to wash that out in the end. So I would use a chalk marker like this just to get some lines. And so I'm going to do a feather circle with this. So that's actually all I need for that. So that gives me the starting of where I would make the feather.
Okay.
Now, I was a machine quilter on domestic machines for many, many years. I started machine quilting, my very first quilts were machine quilted. So this is, I did queen size, king size quilts on a domestic sewing machine. So
that was before even walking foots?
Before walking feet, before any of that,
Yeah.
before, in fact, it was back when we tried to hide that they were machine quilted.
Yes.
So there were all different ways of doing that, not washing the fabric and washing it afterwards so it would puff up and not show that it was machine quilted. But now things have changed and it doesn't matter if it's machine quilted. And I've just recently purchased one of these, so the Sweet 16 made such a difference because I have 16 inches in here versus the tiny amount you have on a domestic sewing machine.
And you're still able, though, to use the same techniques
I can
as
still
free
use,
motion on a domestic,
exactly.
rather than having to learn how to operate.
Right. Right.
You know, a long
For
arm.
me, the long arm just didn't work. Moving the machine was not as natural as moving the fabric was. So that's why I prefer this method. So the nice thing about this machine is it has all very similar features to what my domestic machine had, but it's got more space. So I can still bring the thread up just like I would on my domestic machine, and I'm going to hold on to it, and then I'm just going to start by quilting that first circle. So I'll lock off with a few small stitches and then just go around the circle. And the nice thing about the mark goes away and no one will know if you stayed exactly on that circle. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to get rid of that tail because I don't want that in my way. Another nice feature of this machine that I really like is you can set the speed. So I'm going at about 40% here, which is a nice control speed for me. But you can go clear up to 100, and I can't even remember how many stitches it does. I've not gotten there yet. 60 is about the highest I ever go. So I've quilted my first circle here, and then I'm going to go ahead and add the feathers. Now, of course, the ugliest feathers are always made when people are watching you. But we'll see how we do. Now, this is going at about 40%, and this is a good speed to really control what you're doing. But I have found that sometimes if you go a little bit faster, it's easier to get a smooth. So we'll just go, says 53%, so we'll see how that goes. And that means that I can push the foot control clear to the ground, and it won't go any faster than that. And again, I don't get real concerned about the mark, it's just spacing, so that I can have kind of, that's how big I want my feathers to be.
I'm finding it interesting because as far as, see, that's spaced out nicely and perfectly.
And if those lines are gone, then they look pretty good. So,
but making, for instance, the feathers over on this side of things, from your perspective, is different than making a feather on this side. It's a different direction.
It is a different, so it is, and you'll, one thing you have to remember when you make feathers is you aren't going to have the same number of feather lumps, or whatever they call those, on the inside as you do on the outside because there's less space in there. So when I go to make the ones on the inside, there are going to be fewer of them. And they can be smaller. They could be more even than that one was. But I do think feathers are a really nice traditional design. Not everything I quilt have feathers or traditional designs, but feathers are something that, it's a good practice stitch. I tend to listen to books on tape when I quilt. That was kind of a little one. I listen to books on tape when I quilt because it just helps me not think so much about the quilting, and I relax more when I quilt. And then feathers have tons of variations. I can go back in and add variations on these. I could do that with different colors. I could do all kinds of different things to make this feather look completely different. And I have an example of what this might look stitched out. So this is the same feather, and I've stitched it out on both sides, and then I've just added a little outline around the outside. So it's the same design, just finished out. And you could go on and add it more and more, and you could cross hatch in the middle and just do all kinds of different things to make that really interesting. I tend to quilt really close together, so my quilts do have lots of quilting on them. So if I'm doing just a regular feather that's just out in the middle of somewhere, all I would mark would be this, the spine, and that would be it. So we're just going to quilt on over to that spine.
Okay.
And so then I would just add that in, and then quilt on down. And that would be the same thing as this. Then I would finish it out. But of course, feathers aren't the only thing you can do. When trying a new design, I typically draw it on a piece of paper first, so I kind of get the feeling. It's like drawing in my head. So if I draw it on the paper, my brain kind of gets, kind of sets the design in my mind, so I know what I'm doing. And then it's easier to put it onto the quilt. Kind of worked myself over to a corner here, but that's another nice filler design. The little circles, and the nice thing about these is you can fill it. It's not quite as fast as in some things, but it makes a very dense quilting, so that if you leave an area not quilted next to it, it has high relief, and it'll really pop out, and it'll look like it's trapuntoed even though you didn't go to all the work of trapuntoing it. And then I can mix that in with some other designs. So I could add spirals or leaves or anything in that to fill up the design, and then I could continue the little circles on around it and fill up the whole thing. So like I said, I like a lot of quilting, so most of my designs are quilted pretty solidly. Now I have just a blank piece of fabric here. Like the quilt that shows behind us, you have piecing, so you have areas that you can go in and quilt around, so I can add a fern leaf or something in between the piece sections, and that gives me my guide. So really, I typically don't decide what I'm quilting until I'm actually working on the piece.
Okay.
And that's when I decide what I'm going to do. So that's just sort of the way I've used the, and I could probably demonstrate how. We could probably go up.
Yeah, let's see how.
Let's see
what this baby can do.
This is 100%. Let's see if I can go that fast. I'm not sure well, it's not bad. I think if you were doing lots of overall filling, that would probably be really good, but you can go down to as low as 10%. So if you were doing very intricate, small, or if you were trying to find the outline of something, or stitch in the ditch, it's hard for me to go this slow, so my stitches are very long.
Because you're just accustomed to
Right, I'm used to going faster, and actually it's a lot easier to get a nice stitch if you do go faster. As you can see, I've pinned my quilts. That's the way I typically prepare them for quilting, is I put pin basting in them, and then they're ready to go, which is the worst part, is the pin basting. But once it's done, if it's done right, I can start anywhere on the quilt and quilt an area here and an area here. So I might do all the yellow thread first. So I do yellow here, yellow here, yellow here, yellow here, and then change threads and go back and do the green thread. So that's a nice...
So the conventional wisdom of where you need to start is not really something
if it's
that you
pinned
need to worry about.
properly, and these pins are way far apart.
Sure.
Typically my pins are only about the width of my hand apart on the quilt. They're typically only that far apart. So it takes a while to pin them, but then the pins are out. As I pull the pins as I go, then they're out of the way, and I don't have to worry about them anymore. So for me, the machine quilting is probably the most soothing part. The design is, I love doing the design, I love working with the color, but when I get to the machine quilting, that's the most soothing part for me, and I enjoy putting the stitches in and making it look like a finished product. And I like quilting them myself, and that's what this machine has given me, the power to quilt. Even though I did quilt king-size quilts in a domestic machine, this one I can really not struggle. I have actually the extensions that go on
Right.
the outside. It has two 18-inch extensions that go on each side.
To really hold the weight if you have a
right,
large
but
room.
it still folds down so I can fit it in my studio without taking a lot of space.
Well, as somebody who has won a number of awards, is a very experienced quilter and teaches, what's something that, a very common challenge that people come up against when they're trying to do free motion?
I still get
stitches
should be more even in length. I do not stitch with a stitch regulator because I learned without one and I found it was difficult for me to change over and use it. But my stitches are pretty even when I'm in the mode and really quilting, when I'm in working on a piece. They get pretty even, but I still get that the stitches aren't even. And I think you just have to kind of get over that. We aren't machines, and you know, it is a handmade product. And I don't mind that they aren't exactly perfectly even. In fact, sometimes I'll put heavier thread in and I purposely make the stitches longer because I want the thread to show more. And sometimes with very fine thread, I'll make it smaller and it'll be tiny, tiny. So if I can fill in, I might use a tiny, like a bobbin weight thread and fill in all around a feather or something to make it pop up. So I think for me, that's probably the biggest thing, is to not be overcritical.
Okay, that's a great piece of advice, because when I've tried to free motion quilt, it's like, I can't show this to anyone.
Right.
These stitches are not perfectly even.
I know, and I think we're our own worst critics.
Absolutely.
I truly believe when I teach classes, that's the first thing I say. And they all say, oh, you make it look so easy. Well, remember that I've been doing this for a long time, and I tell them, quilt for 100 hours and then come back and talk to me.
I was going to ask, do you have a recommended 20 minutes a day, or a couple hours?
I usually start with a little piece like this I would practice on before I move on to my quilt, because I want to be loose. I don't want those tight stitches to be the first ones on my quilt.
Even if you've been in the groove of quilting, every time you sit down, you
pretty
still
much.
do a practice?
If I just have a little piece that I pull up and just do a little bit. If I went down for lunch, probably not. But if I come back a couple days later, I typically do.
Okay.
And another thing that you have to be aware of is you shouldn't watch the needle when you're machine quilting. You need to be watching ahead. It's like driving a car. You don't look at the hood ornament when you're driving a car. You're looking at the road out ahead. And so, especially if you have a marked line, you should be looking out at that line ahead of you. You don't want to be looking right back here. You want to be looking out here where that line is, because your eye will see ahead and your hands will just follow what they see. And so there won't be so much, you'll have fewer jerky starts and stops if you're always looking ahead and quilting ahead of where you are. So for me, I think that's probably one thing that I tell most of my students, is to always think ahead, and try not to paint yourself into a corner. If you want to not stop, with free motion quilting, my goal is always to stop the fewest amount of times, the fewest amount of thread breaks as possible. And so I try to quilt from a side of a piece clear to the other side if I can without stopping. So that's really something I aim for. So if you paint yourself into a corner, then you can't get back out.
Yeah.
So I'm usually I would stop at this point and go, okay, I have this over here to quilt, not so much over here, so I need to start working this direction. And that's helped a lot. But starting and stopping with this machine is really easy because it's got an up and down, so I can just pull this up, and when I stop, I do a few small anchoring stitches first, but then I'm able to pull that up, and you can take just one stitch up and down, like that. And so I have my bobbin thread and my top thread here, and then I'm able to just cut this off, and then I'm ready to start right away. I've got both threads ready to go. Not so important on a small piece like this, but on a big king-size quilt, if I have that under here, to get underneath and try to cut that thread's really difficult. So that makes it a lot easier. And then again, to start, it's the same thing. I can bring the thread up from the bottom, and then I can get a hold of it and do my few starting short little stitches.
And that holds it enough.
And that will knot it. And different threads are different. This is a synthetic thread. It's a polyester, so it's a little slick. So I do tend to do just a tiny back stitch.
Okay.
And then go on. I will say that if I run out of bobbin thread or my thread breaks and I'm out in the middle of one of these, I will pick clear back to here to start again. And on a variegated thread like this, I'll actually pull it through to match the thread, so that when I restart, it won't look like there's a break in there. So that's helped a lot. I will say that judges look at that kind of thing. Your starts and stops are really important. So if you want to enter shows, if you're looking to enter shows, that is one thing that they do look at, is your starts and stops. Only one quilt have I ever gone to the work of running all the tails under, and I didn't get any like big acclamation that, oh, you ran all the tails under, so I've never done that again since then.
So you just clip them?
I just clip,
Okay.
I anchor them and clip them off close, and I've found that that really has done all I need to do. But I love the motion, the free motion, and it kind of helps if you kind of sway with it a little bit. You know. But I'm able to do just about, I can quilt just about any design you want. I've moved into doing some more modern quilts, so I've added some of those stitches too. And I think there's places for all these stitches everywhere.
Great.
In your quilts.
Do you have any last words of wisdom for anybody who might be hesitating about trying free motion quilting on any machine?
Just don't be afraid to try it, and
Okay.
and practice on baby quilts, or
Yeah.
give it to people.
Doll quilts.
Gift quilts, because those people don't quilt, and they're thrilled to get your piece. So practice on those, and then save your, as you get better, then you'll feel braver.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for demonstrating
Oh,
this.
thank you.
And it's inspired me. So thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye. Quilters Newsletter TV, the Quilters community, is brought to you by Handi Quilter, designed by a quilter for quilters, and Husqvarna Viking, keeping the world sewing for over 140 years.